find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Judy, what is our title of this episode?
What if it's not therapy you need? An interview with Dr. Alison Greco.
Yeah. We had a blast. I had a blast,
We had
certainly.
a great time. She was very dynamic and so interesting.
And I
could have gone on for another hour.
We could have gone on easily, and we may well invite her back, as it was really great to have the conversation. And of course, I'm all excited in talking with Dr. Alison Greco because she talks the language that I
know.
talk
You
to.
guys, it's like, two peas in a pod.
Oh yeah, and I'll tell you, I want to give a shout out even before you get to the interview. A shout out to what she is offering, which I think is a fascinating thing. Mm-hmm. She's offering what is called paratherapy. She's training people to be paratherapists, right, which is a term I didn't realize until we just had that conversation existed 40, 50 years ago.
Right.
But she is kind of rejuvenating that term.
Yeah.
And a lot of times what people need isn't treatment for some diagnosed problem. They need support of some kind. She said they're focusing more on stability, not change, which I just find fascinating. Anyway, check out our interview and check out her information at para-thera.com.
Right.
So we will get on with that in just a moment. I think all we need to say is buy our books and support our podcast by rating and liking and all that stuff.
Did you say anything about
yes, I do want to say I will put in one thing about my upcoming book. The book is not available yet because I haven't finished writing it yet, but I am looking for people who are willing to be readers of the pre-publication version and give me feedback. And of course, if it turns out you like it, I'll want you to do a review when it does come out. What the book is, it's a workbook. The working title of the book is The Passion Paradox. It's really all about stability and intimacy, but it gets very specific. As I say, it's a workbook. And the subtitle is going to be something like, When You Feel Miles Apart and Still Love Each Other. So if that is the situation you are in, and so many of the people I work with, that is the situation they're in. And it's a painful situation. But if you want to read the book before it comes out and maybe get some help from it and also offer me some feedback, that would be very welcome. And the way to do that is write to me, and you can see, you can go to ctin7.com. That's our podcast website. You can write to me through brucechalmer.com, whatever works for you. Shall we get on with the interview?
Yes, let's do that.
And we'll see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Dr. Alison Greco. Dr. Greco is a clinical psychologist by training and a user experience leader in healthcare technology. She created ParaThera, a service that offers subclinical emotional support for life challenges using paratherapists trained in structured emotional support. Alison, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. I was explaining to actually saying to Judy and saying to you before, and I want to tell our listeners too, I found you because you were on a podcast that we were both on. Actually, I was listening to it in preparation for my being on it, and I'll give a shout out to it. It's the Jeffrey Van Leeuwen podcast, and he does long form podcasts, and I think each of our episodes were over 2 hours, which is kind of amazing. Ours, listeners, don't worry, ours is not going to be that long because that's not what we do, but we are delighted. I heard what you had to say, and I said to Judy, she's right up. You were talking about subjects near and dear to my heart that I've been talking about for years, and I really wanted to hear more from you.
Excellent. I appreciate it.
That said, we love to start off asking our guests, how did you get into the work you do? Tell us something about your own journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I went through my clinical training, and, that's 7 years of education and practical work. And I was in a variety of environments. I was in the prison system, and I was in the college counseling system, and I also worked community mental health. And so I had the opportunity to sort of understand how best to use the therapeutic techniques that I was being given in those different contexts. And then when I left graduate school and had to make a choice to, go into private practice or do something else. My son at the time needed some additional supports. He has autism. And so I decided to go into software because it gave me a little more flexibility and some resources to be able to help give him. So I moved into the user experience design and research, which definitely uses elements of my training. You really need to help other people have an understanding of what it is that the users need. You need to be thinking about mental models. You need to be understanding how to communicate, especially very complicated concepts in healthcare, to an audience that has a need. How can you make that as a good experience as possible? So, a lot of what we were thinking about in terms of compassion and autonomy and a lot of the ethical elements I got to represent within the software community that doesn't necessarily have that same training or that same lens.
Those aren't the immediate adjectives that come to mind when you think about, sort of the Silicon Valley types. Don't think, oh,
Fair, yes.
compassion and
Right.
things like that. Doesn't pop
When
right into mind.
we some of the startups, especially in the healthcare space, want to claim those values.
Hmm.
Um, and then it can be challenging to actually influence them when there is any conflict between those values and making money.
Hmm.
I definitely ran into that. Um, I after right around 2021, I think, is when I joined a company called Sondermind, which is a therapy platform, and they are essentially trying to match clients to therapists by using an algorithm that basically says who is a good match for this person based on what we know about them. And so part of what I was doing was trying to help that algorithm based on what it is that people want out of therapy. So I did a lot of interviewing with people, with potential clients on what it was they were looking for
Mm.
from therapy. And not that this was a new idea, because you certainly ran into this anytime you're working with a wide variety of people. But in this audience in particular, I realized that a lot of the people were seeking emotional support. They didn't
Mm,
necessarily want change. They had had some disruption in their life, a breakup, a divorce, their child had moved on to college, and there was some sort of a death or a diagnosis. And they were feeling like their world was rocked and that their resources were overtopped. But they didn't necessarily have the sense that they needed to change, that there were patterns that they wanted to identify, or they
Mm.
were working to try to save something. Big group of people were just like, look, I need to be supported while I'm on this boat and it's being rocked. And I had seen some of that prior to, but I realized in post COVID how difficult it was for a lot of people to get connected because it was difficult to get into therapy. There weren't enough therapists. Coaching was what was becoming sort of the alternative to therapy, but its focus is very much on change and optimization and growth. And it manifested really that I identified at that time that we had made the barriers to entry to therapy, both to become a therapist and for someone to be able to get therapy because of the medical diagnosis necessary, what insurance needs in order to be able to pay for therapy, and then what it costs to do a series of sessions with a therapist if you're doing self-pay, all of which made it much more difficult. And then societally, after COVID, we were all not as able to connect with our social networks that maybe we had been relying on to help us when those life challenges happened. And so I began to see that there were market challenges and that there were societal challenges that really brought together this need for emotional support in order to help people stay stable, come alongside the ones who maybe already were in therapy but wanted some additional help, or the people who were kind of anti-therapy and were just white knuckling it through life. Um,
Yeah.
and so I felt like this was the time to introduce elements from our training, things that we know in terms of building rapport, in terms of bringing forward sort of reflective statements and that sense of unconditional positive regard that can be challenging to find in our culture right now, especially, that by being able to train people in those skills and know where the line is where we are not doing therapy, we were just doing support and helping people ethically be able to distinguish between those, we are able to help people stay stable and move through those life challenges in a way that would be more difficult without us. And
Mm.
so that's the what I hope is that this becomes kind of a standard practice. I hope that at some point we get competitors and that other people are really learning the skill. I'm currently actually running my first cohort of training for the certification in structured emotional support.
Ah,
And I'm
Oh.
finding that people who are in helping professions that are not necessarily in therapy helping, but nurses, massage therapists, acupuncturists, who are engaging with people who are struggling in some way in their life, have no training in how to support people.
yeah.
Um, and they are really eating up kind of the what to us would be sort of the things you maybe in the first 6 months that you learn in graduate school.
Mhm.
Those beginning how to build rapport, how to hold somebody's pain, how to hold yourself out of it and not have your ego in the middle, how to understand when it's too much and you need to refer out, how to hold those boundaries appropriately, those basic things. I'm finding that there is a really big desire for people who are working with other people who don't have this skill
Mm.
and want to be able to be better at it.
So kind of like paraprofessionals are to teachers, or what the paratherapists are to therapists, I guess, is a
That's
good way to put it.
exactly
Yeah.
where my model came from. Yes.
Uh-huh.
So
Mhm.
I read a dissertation when I was doing some research into I wanted to learn more about how we got to the medical model in therapy.
Mhm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
had some of that in graduate school, but mostly they were just teaching us how to survive in the modern world
Yes.
and not so much the historical element. So I started doing some research to better understand how we got here. And in the 60s and 70s, there were paratherapists. They're now basically community mental health workers or
Mhm.
traditional mental health workers, and even peer support specialists
Mm-hmm.
were sort of started off, and the language was paratherapist.
Oh,
And so
Oh, is that right?
I'm,
They actually use
so
that.
they had
they
that too.
I
did,
had not
yeah.
seen that. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I brought this term of art back
Hmm.
because it was exactly to your point, Judy. What I was trying to communicate was that there are elements in the paratherapist that align to therapist training, but it is a smaller scope of practice, and the intent is stability.
Yeah.
Mm.
That distinction I noted on your materials, the distinction that the intent is stability, not change, is fascinating. I have my favorite terms that I use talking about relationships, where what keeps people wanting to be in a couple relationship is two needs, stability and intimacy. And it's interesting because they overlap quite a bit. That concept
Yeah,
of stability is to say you're not freaking out. The anxiety level is manageable. And the chief skill of intimacy is to tolerate some anxiety, a lot of anxiety often without freaking out. But the stability piece is really important. And I've noted it's interesting in comparing what you're saying because in all of the books I've written, and the one I'm working on now actually, I say things like, I'm guessing if you're coming to my books, if you're coming to my office, your problems are much more about intimacy than they are about stability. But stability is really important. And
Mm.
you're saying you're filling in that part. That's exactly what somebody needs to say. I'm not worried about restructuring my relationship. I'm worried about surviving this huge change that's just been imposed on me. And that's a very
precisely.
different thing. Yeah.
Yep. And for whatever reason, this change, this event that has occurred in my life has eroded or overtopped what I would normally have in place.
Yeah.
So, with COVID, people I think didn't even realize how they were using the gym or the other, sort of third places they would go, or even work where we stopped going into
Yeah.
the office. And those were places that they
Mhm.
were getting the social support that maybe they didn't even uh, recognize was a way that they were regulating. And then
Mhm.
without the access to that, it really made it difficult. And so then people were not able, I think, to handle some of the really big existential challenges that came out of that time,
Mhm.
and didn't have what they would normally use to regulate. And so I'm finding that there is this gap where, if you've figured out how to build your life and you have friends and family who are able to be available and are emotionally capable of helping when the divorce happens or the medical diagnosis happens, then you aren't seeking me out. So,
Mhm.
I was chatting with a potential investor, and his first talk, I brought up Parathera, and he was like, "But that's what you go to your parents for."
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
was
Well,
like,
Well, it
if
is.
you're lucky,
"I love
Yeah.
not
that for
everybody has
you."
parents, you know.
Exactly. I was like, I think
Yeah.
that means that you are exactly where you need to be, and I want more people to have the resources that you've got.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but let's just say there's a lot of people who don't have access to parents who are able to do that.
That's
Yeah.
right. That,
So go ahead.
well, I was going to say one of the things that you talked about was the way that our culture over pathologizes normal human feelings.
Mhm.
So I wanted to get you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I really have seen that bloom maybe in my 30 years of watching our culture, how, because I think the way that you access care is through the medical system,
Mhm.
Hmm.
we decided as a culture that we needed to take that language and apply it. And then we've applied it very liberally. And even the younger generations, who I think are more comfortable seeking help, more comfortable with labels. My son is Gen Z, and people like to introduce themselves with whatever their neurospicy elements are,
Yeah.
and they are comfortable bringing that into their identity. That part I am not unhappy with.
Mhm.
What I see happening, though, is that we have this sort of hustle culture, and we value productivity in a way that I think is quite toxic. And so anything that we think interferes with that, so emotions or being dysregulated or this thing that occurs, we pathologize grief, we pathologize anger. We've
Yes.
decided that if it keeps you from doing the thing that makes you or someone else money, we need to tamp that down. And that we should
Mhm.
be staying in this sort of narrow band. I think positive feelings get valued over negative feelings, even though they should all be neutral and are necessary. And so I think we have a lot of messages that have said, this is good, this is bad. And when you're not in that band, there's something wrong with you. Go get help. And we're going to give you a label. And the only way to do that is to make it a medical one. And so
Yeah.
Right.
I really feel like we have taken pieces of things that can be valuable and kind of corrupted them.
Mm. One of the things I've noted, I remember reading this a long time ago. I think they used the term devil's bargain, that psychology made a devil's bargain with insurance companies, really. We wanted to accept insurance. Well, insurance companies pay for diagnosed, treatment for diagnosed problems, diagnosed illnesses. And so we had to have diagnosed illnesses. So the general shit's happening stuff, which is kind of what you're talking about,
Yes,
is that's adjustment disorder not otherwise specified, which is what we all used. I
And
finally
you
got.
can't just say he's a jerk.
Oh no, you can't just say he's a jerk. You have to say I am suffering from this diagnosable condition
Uh-huh.
because he's a jerk.
Right.
And for a while, there was a period of time, I don't know, 20 some years ago, I remember, where they were trying to crack down on the use of adjustment disorder. 309.9 it used to be, but then they changed the codes.
right.
The adjustment disorder not otherwise specified, that could only last for 6 months. It's like, yeah, because it was
Exactly.
only 6 months, right? And then shit couldn't be happening anymore. And if shit was still happening, you had to keep defending the fact that shit was still happening.
Or
But
come up with another diagnosis.
Well, now we've
come up
moved
with
to
another
depression.
diagnosis. Yeah.
I mean, I have exactly the same experience, because that was when I was coming out of grad school, and the insurance companies, before we got parity, were giving you 3 to 5 sessions.
Yes.
And if they got better in 3 to 5 sessions, because now they have hope, because now you've given them some language, and then they're like, okay, all better. And you're
Yeah.
like, but I
Of
guess
course.
they've adjusted. So then we would have to find something more severe and then justify it in the
Yeah.
symptomology in my soap notes so that I could get more sessions.
Yes.
Um, and so not that I believe that people do not have depression and anxiety. Of course, I
Hmm.
believe that. But my ability to use insurance coding as the um, way that I know how many people actually meet diagnostic criteria, because I've seen how we have to game the system, means
Yeah.
that I can't fully trust those numbers.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Oh, of course not. And
People are
it's
suffering. Yes.
yes, absolutely. And so much of that at one time would have been, well, like you said, talk to parents or talk to clergy or talk to
Yes.
friends or, all of these ways that they're not necessarily, they don't have to be medical conversations. They can be spiritual conversations or they can be, other kinds of emotional support, exactly the sort of thing you're talking about. It's interesting because I wonder what will happen. Let's imagine that your model just takes off, which I hope it does. I think it's a wonderful model. It just takes off, and there's there are going to be people who want to have insurance cover it.
Oh,
And
I get asked this
yeah,
regularly.
yeah,
Do you take insurance? And I was like, I do not. And then I want to explain, why.
yeah,
Um, but I find it interesting because um, people don't, people think about insurance as the thing that covers going to a doctor,
hmm,
or the thing that helps pay for the thing that helps. And
Hmm.
yeah,
so it has been interesting to figure out how to put emotional support kind of on the map, because it gets lumped in with wellness.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Um, and that's kind of then people don't have the same expectations, like you don't think coaching is going to get covered by insurance.
Or
Um,
like going to the gym. It's
right,
like, well, that's not covered by insurance. That's not treating an and some of what
right.
you're talking about would fit there. It's like, and I saw, and we'll give you, I'll invite you in a bit to talk about the four different kinds of sessions you offer.
Oh,
I just think that's really cool. But I just, noting that phenomenon. Well, I'll tell you, I do couples therapy, right? That's my thing. And it's
yeah.
always fascinated me. A couple of years ago, I finally, and this has a lot to do with the fact that I'm in my mid 70s and I'm at the point in my career I'm saying, oh, to hell with it. Not to hell with the work. I love the work. To hell with the insurance companies. And I've always wanted to accept insurance because I don't want to only be able to work for people with money.
Right.
And
The
I
elitist
yeah,
clientele.
and now for a sliding scale, but still, I'm not going to do it for nothing or rarely do it for nothing. So that phenomenon involves work, has always involved until recently for me, working with insurance companies, and they want a treatment plan for couples therapy. And the only
Yes.
problem there is it's not treatment and it's not planned. Other than that, no problem. And I had a go around once with Blue Cross that was fascinating because they said I used to offer what I called couple intensives that and I wouldn't accept insurance for those. But I was on the Blue Cross panel, and they challenged me on a couple of occasions. Said, "Wait a minute, you can't do that. If somebody has Blue Cross, you have to cover them. That's in your contract." And I pointed out they do not cover couples therapy. They cover family therapy for a diagnosed illness. They
Illness,
do
right.
not cover when the patient is the couple, and they had to acknowledge, "Damn, you're right. They don't cover couples therapy." And I wasn't offering legitimately, I was not offering treatment for somebody's coexisting morbidity that involved working together with their spouse. I mean, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do. But I wasn't working on somebody's OCD and helping their spouse deal with it. I was working on couples issues. And they don't cover that. And people are often surprised at that one.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
I remember really struggling with this diagnostic piece, because what I was doing in the therapy room was V code work, right? We're
Yeah.
talking about the circumstances that you're living in and your ability to cope with them. And so your
Yes.
symptoms are actually completely legitimate for the lack of safety that you have that you're managing, right? I can't say that how you're reacting to the situation you're in is in any way pathological, because
Yeah.
I too would be terrified if I didn't know where I was going to sleep or the person who was coming home was violent. Like we are managing your life and your ability. And in this moment, right, I'm helping you to regulate and giving you a moment to be able to feel safe and to process the feelings that come with not being safe. That is important work. And I really love doing that, but it isn't medical. And so
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
have an anxiety
Right.
disorder because I need to give it to you so that we can keep seeing each other. But the work
Yes.
we're doing is not what the insurance company would consider valid.
Yeah. And
Um,
you mentioned we should translate V code work because
oh, right.
that's a bit of jargon from the DSM. That's basically it's the stuff that and I guess I'm a little cynical, not a little, pretty cynical about the DSM,
Yeah,
as many people are. But that notion of V codes, it's sort of like, oh, there's this other stuff that people want to talk to us about, but it's not really, it's not really diagnosable, So it's kind of
exactly.
shoved off in another category. And that's where a lot of the work we're doing, that's where people are. And
Those are
there's an
the daily
implication.
living.
Yeah,
So those are
daily
the
living.
challenges of daily living. That's what the V code is. And it comes
Yeah.
up for everybody. But when you do a diagnosis, you've got the primary and the secondary, and then you have the other things that are influencing that, sometimes a medical issue. And so it literally is at the bottom of the
Yes.
diagnosis, but it is often the most important thing.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
there's an implication, I think, in that, which again runs very counter to a medical model. It's certainly one that, again, I embrace, which is that I start with an assumption. Actually, the word I use for this particular set of assumptions is faith. And I don't mean religious faith necessarily. I start with an assumption that the people I'm working with aren't crazy. And every once in a while, I know it, manic episodes exist, psychotic breaks exist. I get that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not Thomas Zotz talking about, the myth of mental illness. That's not where
Right.
I'm coming from. But that said, so much of what we're working with isn't crazy. It's difficult, but it's not crazy. And so if you start with that assumption, you're already taking it out of the medical model, I think largely.
Exactly.
Well,
I
looks like you're going to have to come up with an insurance model that is not based on medical.
Well, why should it be insurance? The
Um,
issue is, well, how can this get paid for?
right.
And I suppose you could say, I don't know, I'm free associating here. I invite you
I
both to
don't.
comment. You could say it's like infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
like the roads and the fire department and stuff, and you have people available for this in a society that would offer that. Wouldn't that be lovely?
Wouldn't
You
it?
just have professionals who are paid to be available for that
Yeah,
sort of
well, your
thing.
taxes just went up, so
Well, that's the problem.
right.
And there's something to be said for paying for it helps you take it more seriously, helps you
Mm-hmm.
value it more. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, Elsa?
Yeah, I think about this a lot actually, because I think the model of prevention is something that America is not awesome at, right? So we
Ah,
have a
yeah.
tendency to treat after the fact because we like to see things get better. We are
Right.
not
Hmm.
good at the early intervention. We're not good at preventing. And we're seeing that now. We've had an amazing run with eliminating diseases because we've worked on prevention, and now we're at a
Mm-hmm.
place where we have a bunch of people who don't value it, because
Hmm.
it has worked too well, and so it's out of
Yeah.
the consciousness. And so I think that if you have a society and a government that is willing to focus on early intervention, storing up relationships and families, thinking about the ways in which we prevent, all kinds of antisocial behaviors, anti-personal behaviors, that you would invest early, and that social support might be something in the, elementary curriculum that teachers are teaching, that it's the sort of thing that we learn how to do, and
Yeah.
so that the need is much reduced, so that if I'm raising my taxes now but I'm not having to pay for the insurance because I'm paying for both my premium and my copay and my,
Hmm.
I'm paying already and I don't have
Mm-hmm.
access to it. So I'd rather pay the taxes that are then focused on kind of a societal answer and focus on prevention. So I don't know exactly how we're going to do that given where we currently are. But if I had my druthers, we would be looking at prevention as the goal, and
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
not as the add on.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because, some insurance companies will cover your gym membership because they're trying to get you to
Well, they
be,
will. That's right. Yeah.
and so I'm hoping that we can do some deferment. At least
Mm-hmm.
that's how insurance would see it, is that, maybe in a stepped model, you come to us first and you see if because we're relatively inexpensive, right? Because we don't necessarily have to go through the licensure process and we don't have all of the same strictures. And so if you are struggling, maybe you come to us first. We're the, first line, sort of maybe even replace an EAP. And then we then maybe do kind of a triage model. You stay with us
Hmm.
if what you need is within our ability to help. And then
Hmm.
if for whatever reason we're outside of our bounds of scope of practice, we move up. And so I could see how we could fit into the current model by maybe adding a new entry layer, because right now you
Yeah.
enter at the therapy layer, or coaching, which isn't considered part of this process. But if we
Right.
can enter a new sort of bottom step, we can maybe
Hmm.
capture more people, keep them stable, and then fewer people are escalating. That would be my real hope.
Yeah. David Brooks had an article I just read today in the New York Times, which I found fascinating because he was saying he's saying why I'm not a liberal, which is interesting because he's known as sort of a conservative, but not he's kind of an anti-Trump conservative.
Right.
He's so interesting. He's kind of in the middle in that sense, and he's talking about very similar of these themes actually, because what he's saying is there's the research on just giving people money, for example, has been very disappointing to the people doing the research. It hasn't been showing that outcomes are, frankly, any better. And what it ignores is that there are lots of people who have relatively little income who do very well. And there are lots of people who have lots of income who do very poorly, and none of that has anything to do with money. I mean, there's of course money's important, a certain level of money
Yeah,
is important, but
exactly.
it's not about necessarily the sort of things that can be easily measured. It's a very similar phenomenon, like, the insurance companies will go after what you can measure. They want to see things get
Right.
better. They're saying, no, this is about values, some of which are pretty old-fashioned, that when those values are promulgated, people do better. And that is not what either the left or the right has been pushing very much these days. And it's fascinating that if you can get it somehow, wrench it out of the political divide, then you can have
Yes.
conversations about, okay, what kind of preventive interventions work well. They're not necessarily interventions. Maybe if more people were involved in, again, old-fashioned things like religious institutions, if you can make them not be corrupt to some extent, or which, there's always that problem with any sort of large institutions, but religious institutions or other forms, the civic fabric
Right.
that, old guy over here that we grew up with,
Right. And
yeah.
that are so hurting for members these days.
Yeah.
Your Rotaries, your Lions clubs, all these
Yeah, and
different
just
organizations.
the idea that people would want to vote, or the idea that people would want to somehow
Mhm.
participate in a public debate without it turning into
A shouting
a
match.
shouting match and
Right.
immediate ideological divide.
Mhm.
So I don't
Right.
know.
And the identity element, right? So we've
Yes.
made politics into a game, and
Yes.
the way we then make it an ego identity, and now it's no longer about ideas. You can't argue about identity. You
Yes.
can't argue about loyalty. And so once
Yeah.
we've moved out of we're going to be talking about how to help people, we're not in that game anymore. And so
Yeah.
politics can't, I think, be part of the solution in the way that we've currently structured it.
Yeah.
I think that will have to change fairly dramatically. I also think the way that people get their information, and we no longer have a shared sense of reality or
Yeah.
truth, has
There's no
very much
Walter Cronkite
eroded.
anymore. Yeah.
Right.
Nobody has a Walter Cronkite. They can say, well, we may not agree with him all the time, but we trust him, and everybody's seeing that. Yeah.
Exactly. And without that, I think it's very difficult to have a community that can come together, because you have to be a bit wary of whoever stranger you meet, because you're not sure that we live in the same sense of reality.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what assumptions I can make, and I don't know what I can say. And that immediately freezes the ability for a community to combine. And so you end up with these pocket communities,
Hmm.
which is what you see online and even out in the world. And so figuring out how we come back to some shared sense of what is good and what is bad and what is truthful,
Yeah.
I think is a real conundrum, because I think that's part of why in the past we could have these institutions of service and bring people together and they would then be able to say, well, I don't worship the same way you do, but I know that we both value taking care of people and that it's
Yes.
okay to have empathy and that that's not considered toxic, right? Like we've moved that sort of window of what's acceptable way over. And at some
Yeah.
point, we're going to have to find a way of moving it back.
So I want to
Um,
give a shout out to Braver
yeah,
Angels. Do you know that organization?
I don't say
Braver
more.
Angels. Oh yeah, I've been doing that on lots of podcasts. I actually ponied up and joined. I haven't done that much with them, but I'm so admiring of what they do. Braver Angels is an organization that was co-founded by Bill Doherty. You may know that name. He's a well-known couples therapist in the couples
Oh,
therapy world.
okay,
And he's done a lot of research around that. But he was one of the co-founders. I think Monica Guzman was another one. Anyway, back in 2016, around the time of Trump's first campaign, it's an organization devoted to conversations across the political divide. And so they
uh-huh.
have people you sort of self-identify as red or blue or purple. And and they realize it's very, very broadly. You don't have to, you don't have to be stuck there. But it's very useful that way because then they bring together people across the divide and they have actual conversations. And there is this ethic that is very much the ethic that has been missing. They're the solution. It doesn't matter what you come out with, they're the solution. And I also have to throw in the Pro Human Foundation as another shout out.
Mhm.
That was co-founded by Daryl Davis, who is the guy, maybe you've seen him. He was profiled, I think, what, a 60 Minutes or something, did,
Mhm.
or one of
I
the
think so.
shows. He's a jazz musician. He is a black man and decided, he tells the story really wonderfully. He decided
Had a great TED talk.
he got a great TED Talk. How could people hate me who don't even know me? So what does he do with that? He ends up befriending the Imperial Wizard of the KKK.
No,
You've heard of him,
yes,
yes.
yes, absolutely, yes, yes,
Who not right away, but over time renounces white supremacy, along with 200 other guys who have met with him. And he's got this collection of robes they've sent him. And what incredible, first of all, courage. I mean, holy cow, I can't imagine doing
right,
that.
I know.
but but it was all about respect. That was what was fascinating. He didn't go, the Imperial Wizard didn't realize when he was first meeting with him that he was a black man. That was fascinating. The way he tells that story, it's like, okay, surprise, because he thought the Imperial Wizard thought he was meeting with a potential recruit, but ends up inviting him to come to some rallies. So he goes, and these guys are there, and they're looking at him saying, "Well, we know you're inferior." They're thinking, and he's thinking,
And
"Well,
they're telling him that
no."
too.
They're telling him that, but they're also respecting him. He shows up, and then they have these conversations and then they start because the people I'm always fascinated by this too. These stories of people who have renounced white supremacy are fascinating because they will say, what's the guy's name? Ironically, his surname is Black, even though he's a white man who was being groomed to be the head of a major white supremacy
oh,
organization.
yeah, is he the one
He was a
who
student at
grew up in
University of
Florida?
Florida. Yes.
Yeah.
Florida, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
okay,
Yes. Yeah, and he actually met with he was invited by an Orthodox Jewish student to come to Shabbat dinner and met a bunch of people sort of, across the rainbow. And but
And
his point
discovered that they're people.
and discovered their people, but his point was he didn't think that what he was doing was harmful. He wasn't even thinking they're not people. He was just thinking that the paradigms that he was operating under weren't harmful. And he came to recognize by getting to know actual people, oh, it's not merely that I disagree with them. It's like, oh, some of what I'm espousing is actually harmful. But it didn't happen by people yelling at him, telling him how terrible he was. It happened
right,
by actually respecting him. Like, well, where'd you come? What are your assumptions? Where do you come from?
exactly.
I'm inspired by that.
I had a really interesting conversation recently. I went to a friend's party and I was telling them about parathera and teaching people how to do structured emotional support. And she said, okay, so how do you support somebody that you really dislike? So, like,
Hmm.
you don't believe any of the things they believe, and how would you offer them support? That doesn't seem possible. And so, we talked through it a little bit, and I was like, okay, so I think what's important, and this comes out of, the Carl Rogers sort of Rogerian belief of unconditional positive regard and the ability to have non-judgment. And so what I can do is connect with the human emotion and the human underneath the behavior and the beliefs. And those are not things that I have to align with or agree with, but I can connect with the pain that that person is currently experiencing. So I can support terrible people because I have learned how to find underneath what they say and what they do, what they're feeling. And everybody has rage and fear and terror. And everybody then figures out how they're going to go through the world with those feelings. And so
Mhm.
if this person is in front of me who is suffering and the way that they are reacting to that suffering is something that I find terrible, a person who's losing their stuff in the grocery store line and yelling at somebody, or somebody who's
Mhm.
being terrible to a waiter, I want to help sort of de-escalate and make the environment safer for everybody who's in it, which means that I need to connect with that person's pain
Yeah.
and not yell at them about their behavior and not try to correct them, because what they're doing is what they figured out how to do to deal with or block this pain. And it was a really interesting conversation because the expectation I think that most people have in the world is that our calling card is our behavior, our speech, what
Mm.
we say, how we behave. It's not who we are as humans. And
Mhm.
Right.
everything that you talked about here was connecting with level of respect, the emotional aspect of the fact that we do have more in common than not.
Yes.
But if you can't get out of the stuff we disagree with in the behavior and the beliefs down to the humanist piece, I think
Mm.
that takes practice. And I think it probably even just takes discussing it as an option. I don't even think people know that this is something you can do.
Well, that's exactly it. And again, that's where I use the word faith. That what you need, and I say this, couples that come in who are showing faith, and again, it's not religious. It's in fact sometimes very religious people cannot show this kind of faith, and very secular people can. It's not the same. But I chose that word on purpose because there's an element of overlap there. It's this basic idea that reality is right to be what it is, which means if you're talking to another human being, there's some rightness about them. There's something you can connect to that's common humanity. That's what you're describing. And that you better have that because you can't technique your way out of that one. You know,
Oh,
you,
well said.
you can't train your folks. And I actually want to ask you about like what your training is like about structured emotional support, but you
Yeah.
can't technique your way out of actually, and another way of saying it, which is, which may horrify some of the people of saying, oh my God, watch your boundaries, is you have to love them. You actually have to connect on that base, on that level. It's like we are all in this together. And somebody behaving badly, well, have I never behaved badly in my life? If I look at it, we've all behaved badly at one, I mean, to varying degrees, not all to the same degree, but we've all screwed up. That sense of common humanity is what you have to have, and that takes practice. You use that word actually; it's practice. And indeed, I like what you said there because I've just written about this also. The first step is to know that it's possible. To say,
Mm.
you mean it's even like that question that your friend was asking you. That's really cool. It's like, how can you do that? To know that it's possible is the first step. It's like, yeah,
Yes.
isn't that interesting? It turns out you can connect. Turns out Daryl Davis can go and have conversations with KKK people and actually get somewhere. And that's really fascinating.
Hmm. And in I think you're exactly right that when I was thinking about structured emotional support and trying to build this curriculum, given our training, right, I need to have some good theoretical underpinnings. I need
Yeah.
to know that it's rooted in something that is well studied and we know it's going to work. So when I start my training, the very first thing we do is go over the principles of humanist psychology. And so we are very much rooted in we have kind of a framework that we use for SES, and it's three pieces. The first one is empathy. So we have to figure out how to connect with somebody's emotional experience. And so what you're looking for, as somebody trained in SES, is how they're feeling, the subtext.
Mhm.
And you're looking for, because you believe that it's there, you
Yes.
are looking for the pain.
Hmm.
Right.
Because they're coming to us because of suffering of some kind. And
Hmm.
so that's the first thing, is that we want to have empathy for that. And the second thing is non-judgment. So I cannot do this work if I am judging you.
Right.
I have to withhold judgment. So again, it's very easy for me to judge the way in which you are behaving or the beliefs or the things that you say, but I cannot judge your feelings.
Hmm.
They are what they are, as your point with reality. And so you're suffering, and I believe that you have pain. And so I'm not going to judge that. I'm going to work with that. And so I suspend judgment on the behavior and the beliefs, which is practice and work, but it is also an
Hmm.
approach, right? This is our framework. The third piece is risk awareness. So we look at where does the risk lie both to us, so if intervening is going to harm either them or us, then
Hmm.
perhaps we let that pass. Or if when we are interacting with someone and they're saying I'm going to go off and do X and Y, we now have a responsibility to make sure everybody's safe. So risk awareness is a big part of our training in SES. So
Oh, yeah.
the emotional
Wow.
connection is strong, and then we look at the risk piece.
It just suddenly occurred to me as you said that. So are these folks, do they become mandated reporters in
We
states that
behave as
have
though
that?
we are.
Ah,
Um,
yeah, it's an
and so
interesting, it's a gray area, isn't it?
it is very much a gray area.
Yeah.
Coaches are not legally,
Uh-huh.
but I believe that ethically, following our ethical framework, that it is important if you have information that because of our understanding of risk, then you need to be able to appropriately report that. It's just what
Yeah.
humans should do.
Which presumably that gets disclosed to people making use of that service, of course. Yeah.
Yes,
And in
precisely.
terms of supervision, like how's that work?
Yeah. So, we offer during the training, the first 5 sessions are done with with me right now because I'm the only one trained. But
Hmm.
later it will be with managers. But the first 5 sessions are done with someone, so just to make sure that everything goes right. Right? They've practiced, but in the certification, you go through 8 modules and lots of practice, and then you have to show in a video that you can do a mock session appropriately and meet all of the criteria. And then you have to be able to pass the test, which really does load on all of the content, including the ethics and when we refer and where our boundaries lie. And then, once you are doing sessions, then we meet weekly to review
Oh,
video and check on, how is it going? How is your self-care plan? How are you feeling in that you're doing? And we do weekly supervision. So that's my model.
yeah.
So your sessions are recorded?
They are recorded. Yes, we
Uh-huh.
absolutely have that I believe it from a safety perspective.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can turn the video off and just have the
Mm-hmm.
audio recorded, if that is a concern. But all sessions are recorded.
Mm-hmm.
Just I don't want to he said, she said.
Yeah.
And in our world, we don't give advice. We definitely do problem solving. So to your point, we have kind of the
Mm.
4 styles, and in problem solving, I pulled this from Jung. He has this statement of next best step. And so our
Oh,
whole thing is, I really just want to break any problem down very small so that you have this sense that you are empowered to take the next right move. And so we're not doing planning and we're not doing advice. We're basically saying, what do you do next after you get off this call? So things get very small.
yeah.
And it really is just in the service of helping somebody feel like they know they can do something. So
Yeah.
if they're spinning about a decision, I had an interesting one where somebody came in for problem solving, and they had a choice they needed to make, and they had done all the things that you would tell them to do. They had their pros and cons list. They had talked to different people. They had tried to figure out how they were going to make this choice, and we just use reflection a lot. So as
Hmm.
someone's talking, we're just reflecting back, summative, what they've said, the content, the subtext. So I'm picking up on the emotion and I'm bringing it back to them and checking to see if they're aware of their feeling. And what came out of this conversation was that this young man was angry that he had to make this choice. And the reason he
Mm,
couldn't make the decision was because he did not want to. He did not feel that he had, that it was okay to make this choice.
yeah.
And once he could admit that he didn't want to do it, it was angry he
Hmm.
had to. It was much easier then for him to look at the choices because
Yeah.
they no longer were in conflict with how he was feeling about having to make the choice. It wasn't
Yeah.
about FOMO. It wasn't about the fact that he didn't know how to make the decision.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful.
That's fascinating. I want to share with you something. I just wrote this last week, actually, but it's going to be in my next book. It's called the Meta Serenity Prayer. So, the Serenity Prayer, which I will quote, of course, that people know the Serenity Prayer, God grant the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Great. Lovely, important, great stuff. The Meta Serenity Prayer is yes, and God grant me the serenity to accept that I can't always tell whether I can change things or not, and the courage to act anyway. And it's very similar to what you were just talking about. That's a great story. I may quote you on that, or if I may. Um,
You absolutely may.
yes, no, that's a great story because that phenomenon of recognizing, yeah, your problem isn't with the decision. Your problem is the meta decision. You're angry. You have to make the damn decision at all. Your problem is choosing to make a decision. And then
Yes,
once you recognize that, then you can say, okay. And a lot of times what will happen with people, this happens with couples, and it happens, I've written about this with respect to parenting issues. People think these choices are so consequential. I will often recite Philip Larkin's poem. Do you know This Be the Verse? Do you know that poem?
I don't. I might if you
Oh, here
start
it
it.
comes. It's short. I can recite
I
it.
could just.
They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not
Oh
mean
yeah.
to, but they do. They give you all the things they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old style hats and coats who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It passes like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself. I just love that poem. And we're parents, we love our children and our grandchildren. But in other words, it's not going to matter that much within a huge range of parenting styles, as long as you're not horrible. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You just have to basically not be horrible. Mostly it's going to be about, is your kid wired okay or not? Your son is going to be the way he is, and I'll bet he does very well as the person that he is. And you accept him, and you must be a not horrible mother. There you go. See, that's high praise, isn't it? But he's wired the way he's wired. That's
Exactly.
that, and that's legit. And that's mostly how kids turn out. And again, I don't mean to say nurture isn't important, but nature is also very important. And so relax a little. It's not like I had a friend who was he was in a planning commission meeting. They were screaming and yelling about whether there was going to be a McDonald's in downtown Montpelier. And he said, this was like 35 years ago. And he said, people, this is not the bombing of Hanoi. You know, it's like, wait a minute. Everybody calm down a little, and then okay, so whichever you go, it'll probably be all right. If it isn't, you'll figure it out.
Well, we could
I
go
think
on and on with you, Allison, but
I know. I'm like, oh, keep going.
I know. But are there other things you want to say before we wrap this up, this wonderful conversation?
I would just highlight that the I think one of the things we highlighted was that we had the four sessions and the four types of sessions, and they're 30 minutes long. So
Mm,
one of the reasons that we do it in 30 minutes is that I only want to have one topic. So
hmm.
often in therapy, in your 50 minutes, you'll talk about a couple of things because you know that this is a longer term engagement. So with structured emotional support, really it is sort of in a moment in time, and you may come back several times, but for the way that we created the modality, it's 30 minutes and you're really focused on kind of one thing. And the way to encourage focusing on one thing is to have a theme. And so vent, you can come in and vent and really feel your feelings, tell the story. And the goal there really is to hear the narrative and feel heard and walk away kind of lighter because you were able to get that out. The next one is problem solving. So sometimes they go together. You vent and then you want to problem solve. But I don't want to try to do them in the same 30-minute session. So
Hmm.
you come in and your focus is on problem solving. That will be kind of our goal. We'll structure the questions we ask and the way that we do the reflections around that theme. And then the other two we have is building confidence. And then the last one is celebrating. And I took these themes from the research that I had done when I was at Sondermind, but also I did a distillation of why people go to social media. So if you take a look at the different
Ah,
kinds of
wow.
ways that they post,
Mm-hmm.
they are looking for validation. They want to tell their story, or they're
Mm.
like, I don't know who to tell this to, but I got a raise and I'm really excited about it. I don't have anybody to celebrate with.
Yeah.
Um, and then, so this is in the service of making that 30 minutes really impactful, but also it gives people a sense of what is it that I need support in. And
Mm.
so you can take the 30 minutes, but you then show up and if I think of often in my early sessions with someone, we're still getting to know each other, now 50 minutes, that first like 10 minutes is the like, okay, this is how it works. This is who I am, right? The
Mhm.
kind of getting to know you. And so I'm
Mhm.
working to kind of shorthand that a little bit through the themes.
Yeah.
And so that's the way in which we are using the structured emotional support in this particular parathera model. I think you could do structured emotional support in traditional 50 minutes or
Hmm.
even, different modalities. That's just the one that we picked for that service.
Okay.
How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so our website is my main route, and it's para-thera, and that is www.para-thera.com. And then from there, you will learn about structured emotional support. If you want more information, you can sign up, and we have a newsletter about our about SES. And then you can sign up and have sessions. The first session is free. We also have a 15-minute just ask me questions about how all of this works.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, yeah, thanks a lot.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Allison as much as we enjoyed having her.
Absolutely. And as I said earlier, we might well invite her back because that was really just a wonderful
We
conversation.
barely skimmed the surface.
We could go on a lot more. So buy our books and support our podcast and
Do
all
all
that
that
stuff.
stuff.
And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.